Well, here we go again. It happened once again. What do I mean by that? Well, before I tell you, let me just preface this by saying that this type of story is simultaneously one of my favorite types of stories to cover, and somehow simultaneously one of the most aggravating types of stories to cover. And so let me just start this by reading a post to you from MAGA Republican Congresswoman Lauren Boebert. All right. Big wins, she writes, as local communities are receiving over $20 million for important water and infrastructure projects. I'm grateful to all the stakeholders who brought these local priorities to my attention and helped ensure my 10 requests were passed into law. So I know what you're thinking. Luke, I get that you're not a fan of Lauren Boebert, but what's wrong with that? What's wrong with being excited about the incredible job she's done bringing water and infrastructure projects to her district? She voted against that funding. Now, you knew I was going to say that because we've seen this story so many times over and over again. Republicans, so often, especially just in the last few months, we've been covering this multiple times, are constantly trying to take credit for legislation they oppose, and often legislation that was only supported by Democrats, was a Democratic agenda item, and was called out as being horrible and a massive failure, to use Lauren Boebert's phrase, or socialism, Marxism, communism, fascism, Trump sometimes throws in there for some reason. And then they flip around and try to take credit for it, which not only is proof of sort of the two-faced, dishonest thing that's going on there, but also proof of the quality of these policies, right? Not only are the Democrats who actually got it done taking credit for it, the Republicans who tried to prevent it from getting done are trying to take credit for it, because they want their constituents to think, hey, when you see your community improving and you see that in part is because of some policies, some projects being invested in by the government, please think that I had something to do with that. Even though, to be honest, if I had my way, you would not be getting those water and infrastructure projects, please. The White House called her out for this, saying Congresswoman Lauren Boebert voted against this funding. Very simple. And I have more examples of her getting called out. And then I'll show you Marjorie Greene doing the same thing. And then we'll get to one of my favorite clips of a Republican being called out in an interview for this very situation. Just absolutely brutal. Before that, make sure you are subscribed to the channel. Then here's Francis Maxwell fixing the wording of that X post for Lauren Boebert. Instead, it should have been big wins as local communities are receiving over $20 million for important water and infrastructure projects that I voted against, before shamelessly celebrating its benefits. No wonder I had to switch districts to stay relevant. Brutal. Harry Sisson, friend of the show, wrote, Lauren Boebert voted against this funding, but she's now taking credit for it. Thank you, President Biden, for passing policy that even Republicans think are great. That's exactly correct. And then I'll remind you of a moment from Biden's State of the Union address that is relevant within the context of this story. Take a look.
So our bipartisan infrastructure law, 46,000 new projects have been announced all across your communities. And by the way, I noticed some of you strongly voted against it, or they're cheering on that money coming in. I like it. I'm with you. I'm with you. If any of you don't want that money in your district, just let me know.
So pretty good moment there. And you see how, in one sense, it is a good story, because there's some satisfaction to seeing Lauren Boebert admit with her actions, essentially, that she gets these policies are good. But it's so aggravating, on the other hand, because she's pretending like Biden has this extreme radical policy record when he doesn't. And she opposes the very policies that are making her constituents' lives better. But also it's aggravating because it's indicative of a larger issue in American politics, which is because of the problem we have with people being properly informed. There's a lot of people out there who vote against the very elected leaders who would implement the policies that would be good for them, right? That would be good for their communities. And then vote for the politicians who do everything to prevent those policies from getting through, in the name of these ridiculous culture war issues, or the wild fear mongering that's done, or the latest Fox News narrative that they're bought into. And so it is just a really sad situation where we could be doing so many more, us as a country, I mean, incredible things, and could have elected leaders implementing so many more incredible policies if we could just get the information to people properly. If we could just inform people on the contrast between the two parties' record. And that, actually, before I make that point, let me play one more clip from Joe Biden. This was from an event he held discussing one of the infrastructure projects, and he called out Lauren Boebert here.
See us win is Congresswoman Lauren Boebert. You know, that very quiet Republican lady? It's in her district, who, along with every other Republican, voted against this bill. And it's making all this possible. And she railed against its passage. But that's okay, she's welcoming it now.
So that was from an event months ago now at this point. But the point I was going to make before playing the clip was that, you know, in a sense, I get it. I understand, Lauren. I understand why Lauren Boebert would want to be seen as having something to do with not just this project, but essentially the entire policy record of Joe Biden. I think in large part because of media coverage, Joe Biden as an individual has struggled with his approval rating, but his policies, those poll great. And when you inform people on them, they like him a whole lot better, or a whole lot more, I should say, as we've talked about in the past with these polls. And so she wants to be associated with the largest investment in infrastructure since the Eisenhower Highway Program, or the lowering of prescription drug costs for seniors, or the expansion of healthcare for veterans, or the investment in American manufacturing. I'm sure she'd like to be associated with this stunning economic recovery under Joe Biden that has outpaced comparable economies, or the plummet in crime, or any of the other policies we talk about on a daily basis. For the most part, these are policies her constituents really like, until you add the name Joe Biden to it because of all the media baggage that comes with that, I guess you could say. So I get why she'd want to be associated with it. She should just associate herself by supporting these policies, good policies that improve people's lives. Okay, here is Lauren Boebert. One more thing on her, then we'll get to Marjorie Greene and that other clip that I mentioned.
I like to make a lot of noise. Closed mouths don't get fed. So I put public pressure campaigns on people who are not serving the Republican agenda, the America First agenda correctly. And that's pretty effective. But also, I love legislating.
Yeah, you know, every time I think of Lauren Boebert, first word that comes to mind, legislator. Just an effective, serious legislator. No. She is a part of, and in part to blame for, because she's a part of this MAGA contingent that puts more emphasis on political attacks and stunts and nonsense than they do on legislating. She and her MAGA contingent are to blame for the fact that this House has been the second least effective in American history, second least productive. My goodness. Okay, here is some reporting from the New Republic. MTG dragged for bragging about bills she actually voted against. And then it goes through, I don't want to read it because it's just the same story over and over again, but it was, in this case, a newsletter where she wrote, or her team wrote, the Congresswoman meticulously sought out projects that would improve quality of life, increase economic and social development, assist localities with vital funding needs, and harness community support. And up here it notes that the budget bill that made it all possible, she voted against. It so shameless, so dishonest, and I wish her constituents would realize it's, again, not just these individual projects. We're talking about a broader issue. Democrats got into power, majority in House, Senate, Biden in the White House for 2 years, and oversaw the most significant list of legislative achievements in decades. The Republicans got into power and all progress came to a screeching halt. Please, whatever, even if you just hate the liberal guts, You're so sick of those snowflake liberals or whatever. Just vote for the politicians who are implementing the policies that will actually make your life better, and not the ones who just scream about things so that you'll get very excited and angry about them. And then here's the clip that I promised at the beginning that is so incredible of a Republican Congresswoman, Maria Salazar, being, in one of the most brutal ways I've seen because she just doesn't handle it well, confronted on trying to take credit and standing with a signed check of funds going into a district that, again, she voted against. Here it is.
Last month, you were at FIU and you presented a check for $650,000 to help small businesses at FIU. But you voted against the bill that gave the money that you then signed a check for and handed and had a photo op, the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2023, right? You voted against that bill.
Right now, you have to give me more details, but I do know that every time I have an opportunity to bring money to my constituents, I do so. I just did $400,000. But look,
you voted against the Chips and Science Act, right?
Listen, right now I need to ask my staff. But what do we look at the $40 million that I have brought to this community? Aren't you proud of me? Aren't you proud of the $40 million that I brought?
But how
aren't
much?
You proud that I wrote the Dignity Act? Haven't I? Let's talk about the Americas Act.
Wait a second. Let me 1 second.
Tell me.
The money that you talk about, the $40 million that you bring back to the district, sometimes that money comes from bills that you voted against. You voted against the CHIPS Act, and yet you praise the fact that the South Florida Climate Resilience Tech Hub is going to be started in Miami, right? You voted against the infrastructure bill, and you talk about all the money that comes back to the airport. So at the same time that you're taking credit for the money that you bring back to the district, in Washington, you're voting against these projects on party line votes.
Listen, that was, I think, last cycle. I cannot really remember right now, but let's look at the Americas Act, which is what I'm going to, which is
so
what I would like.
You don't want to explain why you vote
really
against
cannot,
things.
I mean, right now, and I'm not trying to be a politician, there's so many bills that I've introduced that I know that many of them
these are bills that you voted against.
That I understand. But it's, okay, sometimes I vote
bills.
and sometimes I don't. But let's look at the positive. Let's look at the $40 million that I brought.
Yikes. And that's how interviews should be conducted, by the way. Credit to that CBS anchor. Yeah, so you can't even imagine a Democrat being like, you know, those massive tax cuts that Trump got through and they disproportionately benefited those at the top of the economic ladder, exacerbated income inequality and ballooned our deficit. I helped with that. And then they get called out because they didn't actually help with it. Well, no, they would never want to take credit for that in the first place. But here, these projects are actually good. And thus, they want to be seen as associating with them. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Click the alert bell. And if you want to get the daily bonus show, you can do so by going to lukebeasleyshow.com/membership. Then, I just did an interview with Don Lemon. And he just interviewed Elon Musk. So we talked about that. We also talked about mainstream media, CNN, all the good things. You can watch that by clicking down there.